Okay, so we're going to continue where we left off last week. So here's what we're going to do tonight, God willing. We're going to conclude the opinion of the Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Waldenberg, and then, God willing, we'll get to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's opinion. I hope we'll conclude it tonight. There's quite a bit to discover there in Rabbi Feinstein's writing. And then afterwards, I want to share a comment with you from the Alter Rebbe and then the Rebbe commenting on the Rebbe, which I think will give a new angle, which may change the way we think of Rabbi Feinstein's position. So let's just take us to where we are. Rabbi Waldenberg and Tzitz Eliezer came from the perspective of to start with, the fact that a doctor can even perform medicine is because Torah granted him permission. That's to start with. Theoretically, a person could say sickness comes from God and healing comes from God, and if someone, God forbid, is sick, then it's God did that, and leave it alone. Okay, so maybe if someone did it to the other person, then we intervene, but if God did it, maybe not. We had all these kinds of different ways of thinking about it. The end was, we went with the most permissive of them, which is all medical healing is permitted to the doctor. Even though there were those who wanted to differentiate between ailments that are external organs or internal organs, right? From birth, not from birth, but we go with that any medical issue, a doctor can heal. But the premise here is that it isn't obvious per se, without Torah's direct instruction, it's not obvious per se that the person should even go to a doctor to begin with. But because Torah says the doctor should heal, so thus that means that Torah and God is empowering a doctor to heal. And therefore his permission to do anything and his empowerment is so limited to the issue of healing, no more. Can't do any more than that. That's the point. This is the perspective he's coming from.
Because it says it twice.
That's right. Yeah. So he quoted here from Rabbi Panet, I think I'm pronouncing it right, the Shaarei Tzedek, who said, who's considering this limitation, if a woman is born with infertile, then and there's no pain that she's going through, no suffering or pain, she shouldn't go to a doctor to get healed, because the doctor's granted permission to heal. This is not an issue of healing. He disregards that notion by saying it's essential to being a human being is given birth, and therefore certainly a person should go to a doctor if, God forbid, someone suffers from infertility and try whatever they can to make it work. But at the same time, says Tzitz Eliezer, what we can take from this is this idea, which is that the permission granted to doctor to heal is limited to when God grants for healing, but not anything beyond that. Which is where he's going to take us to the issue of cosmetic surgery. So let's see. On the left-hand side, on the first page there, the paragraph there, which Kollel Isi. So first he's before he gets into the issue of cosmetic surgery, he first disregards this idea that an infertile woman, God forbid, shouldn't go to a doctor. First he disregards that, and this is what he's going to continue doing before he gets to the issue of cosmetic surgery. So, Kollel Isi, Didi Naili Hagoin Rab, I'm not sure, Yud, either Yaakov or Yosef, Velitz Shlita. I also saw this in the name of my dear friend, the great Rabbi Velitz, may live and be well. B'Yarchen, in a publication, in a Torah journal called Beis Vad L'Chachamim, in the year Tofresh Tzadik, section 26.
Right here.
Yeah. So Shekosav, so this Rabbi Velitz writes in this Torah journal called Beis Vad L'Chachamim in the year Tofresh Tzadik. That's 1930. He writes, L'tmoya L'Shaaros Tzedek. He's curious. He's you want to say something? Oh. Shekosav L'tmoya L'Shaaros Tzedek. He wrote in curiosity about the opinion of the Shaaros Tzedek, who forbade an infertile woman from going to a doctor for healing.
Really? Wow.
We learned this last week already, right? Remember?
Really forbade for that? I don't remember.
That if a person is born with infertility and there's no pain involved, don't go to a doctor. Right? So
Shem's decree finished.
Sorry?
It was the Shem's decree, and that's it.
That's right. So the Tzitz Eliezer is disregarding that. Now he's quoting Rabbi Velitz, who also disregarded that. And the source he quoted was Mikoyach Divrei HaTosfos Bebaba Kama. He did so. This Rabbi Velitz quoted the Tosfos, which we learned last week. Shekosva, which wrote, the Mutter L'Rafos, one is permitted to perform medical procedures, Afilo Chole Abba B'Dei Shemayim, even a healing or even if the sickness came from the hands of heaven, meaning not just sickness that came from the hands of someone else who inflicted some damage upon another person, but even if God did it to the person, still we can go to a doctor. This is what Tosfos says clearly, and therefore this is a direct contradiction to the Sha'arei Tzedek. And we do not say that going to a doctor is as if he is undoing God's decree. We don't say that because God grants permission. And further, Rabbi Velitz quotes Divrei Shaalos U'Teshuvos, Harashba Simin Kufchaf. He quotes the Rashba citation, Sheheshiv Lahatel L'Roifa Yisrael. The Rashba writes, permitting a Jewish doctor Lases Refuah L'Nachris to provide some sort of medical procedure to a non-Jewish woman, Kedei Shetis'aber, so that she should be able to give birth. Why? Mishum Eva. Eva is like a broad term used to describe the importance of having good relations with our non-Jewish neighbors. So the Rashba therefore told his doctor, go provide that medical procedure for this non-Jewish woman, even if only just to create good relations between Jews and non-Jews. That here's a Jewish doctor helping a non-Jewish woman give birth. Yeah. Umayid, and the Rashba writes, Shera, that he saw, L'Rav Moshe ben Nachman. Moshe ben Nachman is Nachmanides, the Ramban. The Ramban who began this whole discussion last week. He was the one who said that the permission for doctors to heal is granted to doctors, but a patient should stay home. Because if a patient was living on a loftier level, he wouldn't need a doctor at all. Right? This is the Ramban who said this. Now this same Ramban says the Rashba, I saw him, Shenis Asik Malachazu, who himself was a doctor, and he himself busied himself with this issue of infertility, Eitzlah Nachris, for a non-Jewish woman, Bischar, and got paid for it. So here's the proof I was mentioning last week that the Nachmanides himself was a doctor, and yet he was the one that argued, at least in theory, that a Jew would be such a high lofty level, or the Jews in the times in the temple were in such a lofty level that they wouldn't need doctors. Yet he himself was a doctor, and he himself was not just a doctor; he's providing fertility treatment to a non-Jewish woman, because that's his job for pay. Now, if we're going to follow the view of the Sha'arei Tzedek, the Eishes Yisrael, that a Jewish woman that's born by nature, Meleda, from birth, and she's born infertile. Asura shetelech l'roifa. If we're going to take the Sha'arei Tzedek's position that she may not go to a doctor to heal her shetelech, she can give birth. In Cana, if so, like Shayach Gam Benachos, certainly you wouldn't be able to do it for a non-Jewish woman. Mishum Eva klalu klaloy, and just because you want to have good relations, you're going to violate such a great precept. God decreed that this woman shouldn't give birth, and you're going to now say she should give birth. So if we see that these people, the Nachmanides and the Rashba, are doing it for non-Jews, certainly you can do it for Jews.
What did they do with Rabbi according to them?
Only for sicknesses that come later in life, not birth, or only from sicknesses that happen to you because someone else hit you.
So you need one time.
So then the Sha'arei Tzedek
using it because of things
right.
They did. What do they use it for? So
double expression is that's right. The double expression is because even for something that comes from heaven, that was Tosfos' argument.
Right.
They might say otherwise. First of all, secondly, the Sha'arei Tzedek is arguing that if a sickness comes from heaven, you can heal it, but if it comes from birth and it has no pain, then you can't heal.
What's the difference?
Comes from
That's his argument.
It has no pain.
Because to him, healing is defined by you're in pain and we heal you. That's how he defines it, which obviously is being disregarded by our sages here. But this is the position of the Sha'arei Tzedek, which is being disregarded by the Tzitz Eliezer, quoting that Nachmanides, that the Ramban healed a non-Jewish woman so that she can give birth. So certainly for a Jew.
What does he do with that extra word?
So for sicknesses from the hands of heaven, but sicknesses from the hand of heaven can come later in life too, and they can cause pain. He's talking about sicknesses that have no pain, like not giving birth. In his mind, it's not considered a pain.
It's the same way.
I say we're disregarding it.
Then what? Then you see, X word is that you do have permission. Not what is he using X word to tell you that what?
So there's three categories. Okay, there's three categories of sickness then. There's three categories of sickness. The sickness that's inflicted by another human, category A. Right, category 2 is sickness inflicted by God, which consists of pain. And then there's a defect the body has without pain. So the third category, defect in the body without pain, says Sha'arei Tzedek cannot heal that. And in his mind, a woman who's infertile is a defect without pain. Of course, Tzitz Eliezer is saying, when we talk about this, the most painful thing for a woman not to give birth, for any human being, which is why he disregards this notion. But the principle is the argument.
What's the word?
For two of them, One for sicknesses that are inflicted by man, the other one for sicknesses inflicted by God, but only if it has pain.
You could heal him. Your Rabbi
That's,
means heal.
that's right, only if it has pain.
That pain is-
Only if there's physical pain, then you can heal. But if there's no physical pain, you can't heal. That's the argument of the Shari
Dr.
Tzedek.
Rabbi is only for
But both of the ways there's no pain. Only
No,
the
there
first
is.
way.
Sure
there's
there is.
pain.
There
The
is.
A person's
second way
sick
is
with
born like that.
If a person can be born like that, but there's pain. A person can be born with all kinds of chronic diseases that have pain. But this is a disease that has no pain. It's just a disease.
Need that to tell.
This is his understanding. Obviously, it's being disregarded here, right? Okay. Elavada, therefore, certainly, Shagam Yisraelis, even a Jewish woman, Muteres is for permissible Leilach L'Roifa to go to a doctor, Lasais L'Rofor, that should give her some medical procedure, this Abra, so that she can be able to give birth. Ayin Sham, see there in the article of my friend Rabbi Velitz, tells us Rabbi Waldenberg. But Oisif Alzeh, I will add to this, he says, let's to cite the Divra Rabbi Yosef to the words of the Beis Yosef, Tor Yereder Simin Kuf Nadal, to give a citation. I'm not sure what that stands for.
When he's saying you mutter to go, it's in our days or even when they
Always,
they had their
always.
that-
This are always mutter to go to a doctor to get fertility treatment.
Certainly is allowed.
Permissible.
So that, even then, it's not from the Ebershter.
It is, which is why they're arguing with the Shari Tzedek.
Also, but what the Shari said held then you weren't allowed.
He says you were never allowed to, and they're bringing proof that you are allowed to because look, the Ramban did it, the Rashba did it. Right? This is what they're arguing back. So the Tzitz Eliezer adds and says, the Beis Yosef writes, Shemevi Gamkein, the Divri Chuvas Rashba Nisker. He quotes the Rashba earlier who said that you're allowed to, and says that I saw the Ramban do it. And the Beis Yosef adds,
This is way after Ramban's already 800 years ago. I'm talking about from the second base of English. When it happened then, in those times that, or by Shlomo, then he didn't go, right?
that's according to the Ramban. There's different opinions, right?
Big difference in years. Let's say with the base.
Remember we learned last week, Rambam's opinion was we always went to doctors, even in times of Beis Mikdash.
Oh, okay.
Ramban's opinion is in times of Beis Mikdash we didn't need to go to doctors, right? There's a dispute about that too. But the question is in the
You don't know.
post Second Temple era, in the post Gemara era, what permission is granted to a doctor? So certainly if the pain's inflicted by somebody else, certainly. Also because of the double expression, if the pain's inflicted by God. But what about if there's no pain, it's just a defect?
That's the main.
Shai Tzedek says no, and everybody else is saying yes, because it's a defect.
Yeah.
Okay? So now he says like this. He quotes the Beis Yosef, who writes that he first cites, this Beis Yosef first cites to the Rashba, who wrote that he saw the Ramban provide fertility treatment to a non-Jewish woman. And he writes, Shavamotza Kosov, that Beis Yosef writes that I found a letter written, Shekosov Leila HaRamban HaRabbi Yoina. Rabbeinu Yoina, the famous Rabbeinu Yoina who wrote the Shari Teshuva, wrote a letter to the Ramban after hearing that the Ramban provided fertility treatment to a non-Jew. Almai says that for this story. He told him, Tov Le'alecha bracha, well done, literally translated, blessings be upon you for your actions. But then said in a kind of like, threw in this like little facetious line. Shatamar bezare shalamalek, you're increasing the progeny of Amalek.
Oh, yeah.
You know, well done. You're making those Jew haters have more kids.
Right?
That's right. He writes it. Yeah. So says the Beis Yosef, "Nishma mizeh miyas." So it would seem from this then, Shagam Rabbeinu Yoina lo micha by Ramban, that even Rabbeinu Yoina didn't say what you did was forbidden. He's only putting up a protest, Rak al Mashamar B'Zai Shalom Malek, because he's doing it to a non-Jew. Aval be Israelis, but if he did it to a Jewish woman, would he write that? In other words, the facetious remark of Rabbeinu Yoina is only because he's making the anti-Semites have more kids. But if it was a Jewish woman, would he care? Of course not. Right? So even Rabbeinu Yoina, who, so to speak, protests the Ramban's actions, only did so on the grounds that this was a non-Jewish woman. And even so, he didn't protest and said you weren't allowed to. He kind of made a facetious remark about it. Didn't quote sources and saying that was forbidden. So clearly, even Rabbeinu Yoina agrees you're allowed to provide fertility treatment, certainly for a Jewish woman.
What gave Rambam
Ramban.
Ramban the authority to do this?
Presumably, he investigated.
He took it upon himself, I guess.
No, he's one of the leading. He was one of the, or if not the leading scholar of the generation. I'm sure maybe he consulted with others, but certainly he consulted with the sources before he did this. Right? Ramban is an extensive, prolific writer with shuvas of his own and commentaries and halachic authority of a great nature.
Right, but we're using him as the example that this is what you can do.
Certainly, yeah. Yeah. In other words, every generation
Yeah.
looks at the previous generations of accepted scholarship and says,
Right.
"What's that as press?" It's like in court when they cite the previous rulings from previous judges.
Yeah, no, because there was a precedent.
It's precedent. That's right.
Right.
But he said it was done in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. So he had to-
We don't know exactly
But
which
he-
procedures.
According to him, he says.
According to Ramban, there was no medical procedures in the Beis Hamikdash at all. Rambam says there was medicine. Doesn't say anything about fertility treatment, but there was certainly medicine in Rambam's opinion. This is Ramban with a
I
nun.
thought the Ramban also held it.
Ramban said in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, go to the prophet. No need for doctors in Beis Hamikdash time.
So
That's what started this whole discussion.
Then he felt that he changed.
Sorry,
Right.
because the Ramban is post Beis Hamikdash era. See, this is also the very fact that the Ramban himself was a doctor means that even though he said in the times of the Beis Hamikdash you didn't need a doctor, he's not knocking the notion of being a doctor because he himself was a doctor.
Clearly.
Right? So it's a question of, is it a first case scenario or a second case scenario? So in a first case scenario where we're living off spiritual energy, we don't need doctors. But because we're not in a first case scenario, we need doctors, and the Ramban signed up to be a doctor too.
Yeah, but
He says that
but the Torah
clearly. He
means-
says
Yeah,
that that's
yeah,
the
yeah.
reason why.
100%.
Because now it's not a spiritual time,
Right.
and that's why.
Right. But part of the medical procedures he gave was fertility treatment. That was one of the treatments he provided. And we have that on record. That's the main point here.
But the Torah speaks about doctors.
That's the proof that
Only-
so that's the big question on Ramban. Why would the Torah talk about doctors in the virtuous sense if in the optimal circumstance there are no doctors? This is a major question that many of the commentaries ask in the Ramban. And before this here is section 8 of this of chapter 41 of his responsa, response number 41. The previous 7 chapters are addressing that question. What exactly did Ramban mean? And it's not relevant to our discussion of cosmetic surgery, so I left it out. But
Yeah, but
it's an interesting
you say
discussion.
That because someone else wounded you. The whole thing that not to have doctors is only for Min Shemayim, but someone else. But you can also say that's Min Shemayim.
Yeah. So arguments can be made all directions. But the end conclusion is doctors can do all medicine. According to Shari Tzedek, no fertility treatment, and now we're negating that. Okay. See further says the.
Hashem gave that loophole.
Sorry?
Hashem did. He did
Exactly.
loopholes.
So if Hashem, right, that was the language.
Terrible.
The Gemara says that God gave permission to the doctor. Why use the language permission? Language permission meaning that healing is mine, says God. Now I'm giving you permission to be my agents. If that's the case, you better use it. That's kind of the way we understand it. Okay. So now it says, in other words, it's opposed to a commandment. A commandment, Hashem says put on tefillin because you're the one that puts on tefillin. When it comes to healing, God doesn't say you heal, I heal. I'm giving you permission to be my partner. That's the language, right? Okay. So the question is if there's any limitations to this permission, to this partnership. Because let's see further. See also in the response of the Chassam Sofer, the famous Chassam Sofer, Hungarian halachic ruler of the last of maybe 200 years ago or so. So he quotes he quotes this argument between the Ramban and Rabbeinu Yonah. Ramban, who provided fertility treatment to the non-Jewish woman, and Rabbeinu Yonah, who said, "Shkoyach, you just added to the anti-Semites." He goes back and forth in this discussion. The Chassam Sofer, Ulahalacha, and his ruling is, Kosev, he writes, one should rely on the Ramban's opinion, who did provide fertility treatment to a non-Jewish girl, David Uvda ben Ashay, because he actually did it. And this is a general rule in halacha. When someone argues a theory, that theoretically this is the right ruling, it has one validity, should say validity, but it carries a certain weight, because the person is making a halachic argument. But then when you cite to an actual event, where so-and-so did so-and-so, it carries much greater weight. Because it's possible that the sage would say, look, because of your circumstance, I'll let you do it, but I don't know if I would ever do that. But if a scholar himself goes ahead and does it, it's a much greater precedent. So says Chassam Sofer, you can go back and forth between the opinions of Rabbeinu Yonah and the Ramban. But at the end of the day, the Ramban went into that room and provided the treatment. If that's the case, you can follow the Ramban. This is what the Chassam Sofer argues. Now continues the Tzitz Eliezer. All of our great teachers, all of these, it never entered their mind. Such a thought, that one should preclude from the business of healing those who are infertile. Even if it was because by God's decree. Not because they became sick later in life, they became sick and then now they can't have children. No, if they weren't born that way, No one until a Shaarei Tzedek comes along and says, including all these scholars, no one ever says, God did it, maybe we shouldn't heal. No one says that. So clearly, this is something we should be healing. Because if it was relevant that this person was in pain, then they should have mentioned it in their writings and say the reason why we're providing fertility treatment is because there's pain. They ignore that. They just talk about the fertility treatment of its own, meaning the fertility treatment is a valid medical procedure which a doctor should perform. So clearly it's permissible to do such procedures. Okay, so this is all to get to his main point, which is as follows. However, if when it comes to the scenario of the Shaarei Tzedek, which is the issue of a woman born infertile without any pain, Pashat lahater, it seems clear to me permissible, go to a doctor, get your fertility treatment. As it's been the custom of Jews in this regard. Avalbat, yesh daiti, there is, in my view, says the Tzitz Eliezer, hashlachais lechidusha, there is application, there is relevance to his opinion. Benegeya, with respect to not fertility treatment, because in that regard, disregard what he said, go to the doctor. But there is an area in which I will take his view. Namely, l'nituchim plastiim, the plastic surgery, shemivatzim, which is performed, ka'es nowadays, haroifim by doctors, etzel harbe b'nei adam, by many people, l'shem yoifi everehem, just to beautify their limbs, kedoim and the like. Be'ein shumach le'ke'ev, when a person suffers from no sickness or no pain. V'yesh mokum gadol l'tayna zois, and there's great room to make this claim, that not under these circumstances, this is not the circumstances in which Torah gave permission for the doctor to heal. Now, it's even though I'm disregarding the Shaarei Tzedek and saying that fertility treatment is something a doctor should perform, but his way of thinking, which says, when we come to a procedure, let's ask ourselves, is this the kind of thing God gave permission to the doctor to do? And therefore, we take it to a case where there's no pain, no sickness, just a question of beautifying the limbs. I'm not convinced, says Tzitz Eliezer, that this is the permission God granted for doctors to heal. And then he puts in parentheses, in healing, if we can even call this healing, in quotations he puts. The Torah says, the Gemara says, from here we granted permission from doctors to heal. To heal. Is this a healing? It's not a healing. It's a procedure. So who gave him permission to do this? This is his perspective. This is the way it comes from. There's no permission for a human to allow doctors to literally means to wound themselves for this goal, for this end of beautifying their body. Not a good enough reason to inflict pain upon yourself, which, as we'll see from Rabbi Feinstein, is a serious prohibition to inflict pain upon oneself. To wound oneself is a prohibition, and we're going to learn about what that means. So if there's no medical value in cutting open my body, then don't do it. This is what he says. Not only is no permission for the patient, there's no permission for a doctor to perform such a procedure. One should know and believe. There is no artist like God. He the Blessed One. He formed and implanted the nature to each and every one of his creations, but Salmoi in his image, but Musa in his form. Upon which one should not add or degrade. This is the image of God. You don't like it, so you're changing it. Doesn't work that way. This is his perspective. We're going to see further the language he uses, and you'll see why. I think he's talking about a specific. This is the Tzitz Eliezer speaking, Rabbi Waldenberg. He continues, top page Kuvav. Puk Chazil Ramban Zal. Go have a look at that which the Ramban writes, the Nachmanides, who we talked about before, the doctor who performed fertility treatment for the non-Jewish women. Look what he writes in a book called Sefer Torah Adam. In a book called Torah Adam, Shar HaSakana, section called that deals with danger. Shachata Litzei Tam, who investigated to find a reason, Madua, Shemaka Adam L'Rafua Potter. If someone wounds a fellow man, but he does so for the sake of healing, why does he not have to pay for damages? And then Ramban goes through a whole complex back and forth reasoning to come to the conclusion that no, the doctor doesn't have to, because at the end of the day it's for healing. Even though Torah says straight up, If you wound your friend, you pay. You pay. So you wounded, you pay.
The intention is not to ruin.
Even if his intention is not to ruin.
But at the end of the day.
Okay, so I'm sure he goes through all of that. The point is, he doesn't just say at the end. He doesn't just willy-nilly say, "Yeah, doctors can do whatever they want." He says maybe you have to pay for the damages of cutting him open.
But that's part of the procedure.
But so in other words, like this: even if you're allowed to do something, even if something is good and it's part of the procedure, the question is, what does Torah say about that? And if Torah says when you wound somebody else, you pay, so then pay.
Yeah, but that's not considered wounded in terms of
Okay.
Torah's perspective.
I'm sure I didn't look up the Ramban, but I'm sure he discusses all of that. The point is, he goes through that procedure, right? As if to say, only when it's medical procedure do you get to wound somebody else. You don't get to cut somebody else open just for other purposes, as in beautifying yourself. That's the point he's trying to get to, right?
Okay.
But the point is this: Uba Allah, and he comes to the conclusion, Mikayach zeh, mipnei de mitzvah v'haftarech kamocha, because there's a mitzvah to love your fellow as yourself. And because to love your fellow as yourself, and if God forbid a person himself was in a medical situation, he would want his body cut open to have that surgery, so then he should do it to his fellow friend. But otherwise, hands off a person's body is the point. We see from his words, says Tzitz Eliezer, Sham ba'Allah, we see it clearly. It wasn't enough. See, the Gemara elsewhere says, the Pasuk says that you should return a lost object to a person. And the Gemara there says, the Darshinon, we derive that Rabbi Sevet is gufay, even if his body is lost. Meaning if some part of his body that's lost, it's sick, so the doctor can go and heal it and put it back. But that wasn't enough for the Ramban to conclude that therefore you don't have to pay for the damage of the wound. Only because love your fellow as yourself. That's how far the Ramban's taking this idea that you don't get to touch somebody else's body unless you absolutely need to. Otherwise you don't touch a body. This is the point they're trying to make. The limud zeh, this idea that the Torah says return the lost object, and then included in returning a lost object is to restore or return the body. The mitzvah refuas hanefesh, lemeid mekayach v'shavei silvai, the mitzvah to heal somebody else. We learn from the pasuk which says, "Thou shalt return the object," which includes within it the restoring of the body. The Ramban himself quotes that passage from the Gemara. Nonetheless, when he speaks over here, where the medical procedure requires that you inflict a wound upon the person's body, in order to heal him, he couldn't find enough reason to allow, even to rely on this teaching which says, restore the body, which is where we know that doctors should do healing, because he's fulfilling the mitzvah of restoring the person's body. That alone wasn't enough for the Ramban to conclude that it's okay inflicting wound on someone else for a medical procedure. And you have to rely on the fact that the Torah also says, love your fellow Jew. That's how far the Ramban takes this notion that we don't touch a body unless we have to. Or another person's body, certainly. Because the Ramban's of the view that in these circumstances, that it's part of the medical procedure. You have to inflict a wound upon him. You cannot include it in this category of restoring the body, because this doesn't count as restoring the body, considering that you're inflicting a pain, you're inflicting a wound. You have to inflict the wound and cause a loss to the body. Let's use an example of a person who's, God forbid, his leg is infected, and they have to amputate. So can you call that restoring the body? Says the Ramban, the way Tzitz Eliezer is learning, no. So then if so, how come you're not paying for the damage of a lost leg? Because love your fellow as yourself. If not for that,
you could die if you don't cut it off.
Sorry?
Cutting a guy's leg off because you love your fellow.
That's right. Because otherwise the infection will kill him. But as far as the medical term, as far as the medical halachic designation, restore the body, that's not enough to permit amputating a leg, God forbid. For that, we have to have another derivation, love your fellow as yourself. He's just trying to prove the point of how far we take it, that we don't want to touch another body unless we have to.
So what medical procedure would be considered restoring the body?
The person's fingers, God forbid, severed, and you restore it. That's the classic example. You're literally restoring the body. Literally returning the lost object. Lost finger, put it back. Almost literally, right?
Why does he have to come on for help? The guys are going to die. Forget about help.
That's v'hafta, because you love. That's exactly right.
No,
Yeah.
He's if you don't cut it off.
Okay, let's say it's a question of pain, not death. I don't know. Find some scenario. Okay. Therefore, Himtzi Haramban, the Ramban found, but Daita Gdola in his great mind, Shemikomokum nonetheless, Bikivan Shachabala Bakadela Hamtzi Loi Mazar Vermarpa Shalidide Ba'atzme Bavadoy Isakain, because this wound, through that, the person finds healing, that for himself he would have taken it. Right? If God forbid he was suffering from that ailment. I would not stop myself from going through the procedure because my body will happen to be wounded when I come out of the procedure, because it's a question of my health. Therefore, there's a mitzvah to do it to your friend, because Torah says, love your fellow as yourself. And if I would go through amputation because of the sickness, God forbid, then I should perform the same procedure for somebody else. The im kain butter, all to say it's clear, says the Tzitz Eliezer. You cannot extend the novelty beyond the parameters of the novelty. In other words, like this: if the premise is doctors can do whatever they want, then you have to impose limitations, right? But if the premise is you can't touch someone's body, we only allow you to do healing, then you cannot go 1 inch beyond healing. Following?
That first premise seems very far-fetched to me, that doctors can't do anything.
No, that's a bad way of putting it. But the premise is that the body is God's, and God provides sickness and healing. Now, Torah says we're giving permission for doctors to heal. Okay, so then heal, no more. That's the point. Which is why the Ramban has to find the verses to expand the permissibility to allow the doctor even to do amputation. Because beyond the permission of Torah, the doctor can't do anything. Is the point he's trying to make. And the limitation ends at healing. That's the end of the limitation, which is as broad as it can possibly be. Right? There are other views that had even greater limitation. You can't do medicine on internal organs, only if it came from other people, not from God. Only if it has pain. So we're taking all those things. Say all those are permitted, so long as it's in the great umbrella called healing. Beyond that, no touching.
So that is why amputation is okay, because it's considered to be healing.
That's correct.
Right.
Because love your fellow Jew as yourself, and then love your fellow, and you would do it to yourself. Therefore, do it to the other.
But it's healing.
And it's healing.
It's healing.
It's healing. It's part of the permission of healing. That's right. That's what he says. So butter the ein lach ela chedushay, one cannot expand the novelty beyond the limits of the novel situation of the permissiveness of that novelty. The makom shechabala ba kedei only if the wound is coming here to heal, and in that way to restore his body. The yotzim michlal zeh, and therefore left out of this category is chabala l'shem noi, inflicting a wound for the sake of beauty. She'ein ba kol hashava shel avedis guf. There's no such thing as restoring the body here. Im ki lachbol kedei l'shanoisoi lefi taimoy l'schakam al tzur shechakam ba yotzrei. The only thing he's doing is to change it based on what he thinks is nicer, because he's smarter than the creator who made it that way.
It's a great argument.
Right?
Seriously.
Or because he wants to renew his youthful look, and in this way to undo the decree of heaven that a person gets old and his body changes. So if you're talking about healing, is healing, but beyond that, how much more so? The nala mikol safek, it's beyond all doubt. It's forbidden for a person behechlet. So this is, a doctor can't do it. So certainly for a person, a person should put himself into a situation for this reason, for the sake of beauty, the shum sakana to any danger. Kol shehi, even the slightest danger. A person's not allowed to put himself in danger either. So there's permission Torah grants to make a living, for healing. A person can do danger. So again, the same thing. If Torah says you can't put yourself in danger, then you cannot go beyond the permission that Torah allows you to go in danger. And no one Torah does say, we let you go in danger so you can be beautiful. Right? So certainly one should not put himself in any danger. Hakaruch, which is connected, but derech klal in general, b'chol netuach shu, in any surgery there's an element of risk. Ubekan, and here, kafulu. It's doubled. Al pi reva nituach, because of the many of the procedures is ha'echad b'chilek haguf shemisham maitzim chatikas ha'ar. It's so many different parts of the body, because you're taking skin. It's talking about skin grafting. When you take skin from one part of the body, but makom sheretz and makiva, and you take it to a different part of the body. Va'ach maguchachu. It's maguchach is like repulsive almost. It's abhorrent. Lavoy latzia, to come and suggest, lahatir litzuach kazeh, to permit such a procedure, lenoshim, for women, begivu of kolos, who have deep voices. You want to start changing their voice around. What are we doing here? Like, what's wrong with the way the woman is? What are we doing? You can hear his line. I'm trying to be as faithful as I can to the language. Of course, we're going to get to Rav Moshe soon. He's permissive, but I want to just be as faithful as I can to the language here. And what do they do this? What's the repulsive part? The abhorrent part that they permit it by citing al pi midrashim shonim. They quote various midrashim, hamahal ma'yofil noshim, which praise the beauty in women. And because the medrash, many places, praises the beauty of women, therefore they say, okay, let's go beautify women. You're quoting a medrash to give this procedure on a woman? What are you talking about? You're completely misreading the medrash, and this is abhorrent, he says. Very sharp. It's not even worth my time responding to these silly claims. There's no room for this in Jewish law whatsoever. Such fantasies, lamata, is much lower from that which they said, one does not learn from medrash. There's a principle which is, a person does not derive Jewish law from a medrash. Medrash can be often not literal, and Jewish law is literal. So one doesn't derive halacha from medrash. So he says, this notion of quoting medrashim to permit yourself to do a plastic surgery on a woman to make her look beautiful is even more laughable than someone deriving halacha from a medrash. That's basically what he says. And therefore, it's not even worthy of my response. But in a kind of poetic way, I can respond the following. B'dvarai she'im yois shehitit beruach Hashem asher bekir bo v'amar. 1 second. Sorry. B'divrei Shlomo HaMelech olav hashalom. I can respond in the words of King Solomon, shehitit beruach Hashem asher bekir bo, which shared from the Spirit of God that was within him, v'amar, and said, we say this every Friday night, sheker achein, false is vanity, v'hevel yofi, and not is beauty. Isha yiras Hashem, a woman who fears God, hitisalo, this is praiseworthy. And therefore, kol asher naga Hashem b'liboy, yiras Hashem b'liboy. Kol asher yiras Hashem naga b'liboy. Anyone with a fear of heart, the fear of heaven, is relevant to his heart. It's not going to just run after this trend of plastic surgery. Just for the sake of beauty and aesthetics, bavad alone. V'shal pi harov, where in most cases, it's only a question of what's the word? Only like a visual beauty. V'halach nefesh al bnei adam. It's just, people are looking one after the other, and v'halach nefesh means like the culture of people. She'ein echad dom l'mishneu, where no two are alike. No, I'm sorry. Beauty is, by and large, dependent on the eye of the beholder, which is different to note for each person. V'shal zeh kvar heivi b'shal shuvos Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbi Yehuda already writes in his responsa. We once had the first Teshuva we learned was from Rabbi Yehuda, the one about hunting. He writes, the citation. Madamatli amrinan. I'm not sure what the word matli means. I tried finding it. I couldn't find what it means. Anyway, there he writes, Hacheshik ein le'anayim. Desire has no eyes. Meaning to say, there's no standard to desire. Everybody desires something else. Va'afilu yisafsif min hashamayim. Aidei tefillah, even someone who wants to beautify his life, not through procedure, who wants to beautify his body through prayer. Matzinu b'chazal, we find in the Gemara, in Tainus, page 4, Tainus, page 23, side B, Shali Allah hadavar yafa, that it didn't work out well when a person prayed to Hashem asking for beauty, until the person was restored back to his former ugliness. So let's learn the Gemara. It's a beautiful story in the Gemara. It's worthy of reading. So go to the next page in the English translation there, to page 6. 2 stories from the Gemara that he's going to quote that are very beautiful. Gemara relates the following in, and furthermore, bottom of the page 6 there. And furthermore, the Gemara relates that Ramani was frequently found before Rabbi Yitzchak ben Eliashiv, a well-known miracle worker. Once, Rabbi Mani said to him, "The wealthy members of my father-in-law's house are persecuting me." Okay? Rabbi Yitzchak said, "May they become poor, so they will no longer lord over you." And indeed, they became poor. Sometime later, Rabbi Mani said to his teacher, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Eliashiv, "Now that they are poor, they are pressuring me for financial support." So Rabbi Yitzchak said, "May they become rich again." And indeed, miraculously, they became rich. Now, Rabbi Mani said to his teacher, another incident, "The members of my household, i.e. my wife, are not acceptable to me, as she is not beautiful." Rabbi Yitzchak said, "What is her name?" Rav Mani replied, "Chana is her name." Rabbi Yitzchak declared, "Let Chana grow beautiful," and indeed she grew beautiful. After a while, Rav Mani said to Rabbi Yitzchak, "She acts haughtily toward me due to her great beauty." She was ugly. She was a nice woman. She became beautiful. Now all of a sudden, she's not exactly such a nice wife anymore. So he said to him,
that only cost $7,000.
Exactly. He said to him, "If so, let Chana return to her homely appearance," and she returned to her homely appearance. What's the point Tzitz Eliezer is trying to say is, God knows what he's doing. And he made one woman look this way, and other women look that way. This person's rich, this person's not. He knows what he's doing. So now let's go back to the text go back one page to the text of, 2 pages, to the text of the Tzitz Eliezer. The bottom. If the Gemara is teaching us not to bother God, to ask Him to change the nature of people, then Allah has come how much more so. That a person on his own should not find clever schemes to change nature in such a manner. It's as if he is saying to the maker that made him, to God, "How ugly is the thing you made."
Well, it's like Yerushalayim and all this, and like mixing up. And the whole point is not to mess with.
That's right.
Right. So this kind of it reminds me.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
things are the way they are. Don't mix up all these things.
That's right.
You're not allowed to put this together. But there's a big but.
We're going to see the but, and Rabbi Feinstein is going to disagree. So let's look at the next page, page 7, 2 pages later. The Gemara in Tainus, he made reference to this Gemara. It's another beautiful Gemara. So the first Gemara we read is a beautiful Gemara, teaching us to be aware that the grass is always greener on the other side. You think it's going to be great when your wife is beautiful, and it's not so great. You think it's going to be great when your brother-in-law is poor, and it's not so great in the end, right? That's the point of that story. So there's another story here, a very beautiful story in the Gemara. Also the Gemara in Tainus. The sages further taught in praise of the reed, like a reed that grows in the riverbank. A person should always be soft like a reed, and he should not be stiff like a cedar. An incident occurred in which Rabbi Eliezer, son of Rabbi Shimon, that is Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Eliezer, son of Rabbi Shimon, he came from Migdal Gedor, from his rabbi's house, from his house of his teacher, and he was riding on a donkey and strolling on the bank of the river. And he was very happy, and his head was swollen with pride because he studied so much Torah. He happened upon an exceedingly ugly person. He said to him, "Greetings to you, my rabbi." This is what the ugly man said. But Rabbi Eliezer did not return his greeting. Instead, Rabbi Eliezer said to him, "Worthless person, how ugly is that man? Are all the people of your city as ugly as you?" The man said to him, "I do not know, but you should go and say to the craftsman who made me, how ugly is the vessel you made." Who? Sharp line.
Big time.
I don't know who's ugly and who's not ugly, but you go to the one who made me and tell him that. This is the line that the Tzitz Eliezer quoted in saying that someone who does the plastic surgery just for the fun of it is like telling God, "Oh, that vessel you made, that's ugly, I'm going to fix it." That was the line he quoted. So the story continues because it's a beautiful story and we should really know this story. When Rabbi Eliezer realized that he had sinned and insulted this man merely on account of his appearance, he descended from his donkey and prostrated himself before him. And he said to the man, "I have sinned against you, forgive me." He realized how terrible what he said was. The man said to him, "I will not forgive you Go on till you go to the craftsman who made me and say how ugly is the vessel you made. Don't ask me for forgiveness. I'm not forgiving you. Go to God. You insulted God, not me. I'm not forgiving you. He walked behind the man, trying to appease him until they reached Rabbi Eliezer's city. He just followed the man. He was just following the man until he would forgive him. The people of the city came out to greet him, saying to him, "Greetings to you, my rabbi, my master, my master." The man said to them, "Who are you calling my rabbi, my rabbi?" They said to him, "To this man who is walking behind you." He said to them, "If this man is a rabbi, may there not be many like him amongst the Jewish people. If rabbis are the kind of people who insult people they don't like the way they look, I don't want to hear of any rabbis ever again in my life." So they asked him, "For what reason do you say this?" He said to them, "He did such and such to me. He insulted me, telling me I'm ugly." They said to him, "Even so, forgive him, as he is a great Torah scholar." So he then said to them, to his fellow city men, "For your sakes I will forgive him, provided that he accepts upon himself not to be accustomed to behave like this." Immediately, Rabbi Eliezer, son of Rabbi Shimon, entered the study hall and taught, "A person should always be soft like a reed, and should not be stiff like a cedar, as one who is proud like a cedar is likely to sin." Because remember, the beginning of the story is that his head was swollen from Torah. He was so up in his own head that he overlooked the most basic of things. Be a little humble, be a little soft, and understand that other people look different than you do. And therefore, due to its gentle qualities, the reed merited that a quill is taken from it to write the Torah scroll, phylacteries, tefillin, and mezuzahs. So with this story, concludes that Tzitz Eliezer. Go back to that page. Alkein, therefore, near la halacha, it seems to me in Jewish law, Keniskal as mentioned before, the asle la adam lasis le nituach plasti, forbidden for man to do a plastic surgery, and for a doctor to implement and to do a plastic surgery, l'shem yofi, for pleasure, for beauty, ukadem, and like Keniskal as mentioned above, the ain laharat bekan yosim izeh, no reason to elaborate any further. You got my point. This is the view of Tzitz Eliezer. So now we'll start at least the Igros Moshe. So take one copy of each, take the actual letter, and then also the source sheets. Do you want to ask something?
Yes, so I have something. Here. This is something I got today from about 11 fascinating facts about Yocheved, mother of Moses.
Yeah, Yocheved, yeah.
Yeah, so it says here, point number 8. She gave birth at 130, but they were speaking about the marriage of
her and Amram.
Right, yeah. But anyway, it goes on to say that Yocheved was 130 years old, yet she is referred to as the daughter of Levi.
Right.
Rabbi Yehuda explains that at this point, she miraculously became like a young girl, with smooth skin, a younger face, and renewed fertility. Somebody did something there.
Seemingly God did that.
Right. So, couldn't one argue then that it's okay?
It's not a terrible thing.
Yeah.
Arguments can be made in a lot of rounds.
Abraham's wife, same
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and he did it so that they would be able to, I guess, have
Kids.
children easily without any problems and so on. And why, if it is so important for them to be who they are, she should give birth at 130 without any problems.
It would seem to me, given the language of the Tzitz Eliezer, that what's bothering him most is a culture of everybody running after everybody else. Oh, what job did you get? I'm going to go do it now also. And they're slicing the bodies open to keep up with the Joneses. That's what it sounds like from the language.
But why with one and not with another? Is it because she was Moses' mother?
It's probably because Hashem wanted them to conceive, and God did that to make Amram want to be with her. I don't know. I can think of a lot of ideas. I'm just saying that it seems to me that the Tzitz Eliezer is speaking about a trend more than a specific circumstance. Meaning he's not addressing a specific person. The Moshe Feinstein you're going to see is talking to a specific woman. We're going to see in a moment. She talks to a specific woman. Whereas
he's having the kid because Miriam said you're worse than poverty, not because they
right. So Hashem did him. Okay.
Beautify her because of that. That's just made it younger because to have birth and milk, whatever, nursing.
Yeah.
But not because I don't think I'm for her because
right.
of that.
But as far as Jewish law goes, it goes back to the thing Tzitz Eliezer said, which is ein lemedim min madrashis. One cannot derive Jewish law from a medrash. This is a madrashic idea. It's not a halachic notion. This is a classic madrashic notion that wouldn't teach law. But beyond that, it seems to me that the Tzitz Eliezer is talking about, he isn't talking about a specific person. He's talking about a general mode. People are running after getting their body changed.
It's Rashi, it's not.
Sorry?
No, I'm saying it's not in the Rashi says.
Even if it is in Rashi, it's a medrash. It's not a halachic idea.
Right, it doesn't say.
Yeah. Anyway, it seems to me that the Tzitz Eliezer is speaking again in general terms, speaking to a culture, speaking to a trend, and doesn't like this idea of women tripping over themselves because they want to keep up with the latest trends of how to look. I was like, what kind of thought process is it? Meaning, he argues more with the thought process. He argues as much with the thought process as he does with the technical cutting. Right? He talks about the cutting itself, that a person's not supposed to inflict a wound upon himself unless it's for healing. But beyond that, he goes to argue to the culture. How are you thinking? This is God's body. What are you running after? Because your neighbor got a job, therefore you have to get a job. That's kind of what he's talking to. He isn't talking to a specific person who asked him a specific question, right? He's speaking in general terms, right? That's what it seems to me. So when we see the Igros Moshe and he addresses a specific scenario, it's possible, it's conceivable, even though on the face of it, they're certainly arguing. Rabbi Feinstein and the Rabbi Waldenberg are certainly arguing on the face of it, but it's possible, conceivably, that the Tzitz Eliezer would acquiesce in certain circumstances. It is possible, but let's see. We'll reserve comment for now.
Isn't there a law that you have to be beautiful for your husband? A lot of times you're positive.
Certainly, yeah.
If you have to be beautiful, this is one of the ways to make him beautiful.
Okay, so that's possibly the scenario of this case. Let's see Rabbi Feinstein. Let's get a better picture.
How do you define beauty?
Okay, so this is
Everyone's beautiful.
right.
This is
Okay, which is something that Tzitz Eliezer said, that beauty is not the eyes of the beholder, right? He quoted that. The Tzitz Eliezer wrote that. Okay. So Rabbi Feinstein is writing here, this is in, I think it's volume 11, right? Where is it? Volume 4. No, 11 was in the Tzitz Eliezer. Volume 4, in the section Choshen Mishpat, letter number 66, Siman 66.
do a diet or no?
We're not doing the diet one. It's an interesting one, the diet one. It's a short one, it's interesting. But actually, I will make reference to it soon, because he's going to make an argument later that is the same argument he makes in the case of the diet. So let's see. Nishalti, so this is 20th of Adar Tafshin Chav Dalet. What year is that? 1964. 1964. How advanced is plastic surgery in 1964? Less advanced than today. Probably. But it was obviously something that was wanted, used. So he says like this. Nishalti, I was asked, the night of a young woman, she wants to make herself more beautiful. But for what purpose? So first of all, Rabbi Feinstein's already addressing a specific girl, unlike the Tzitz Eliezer, which is talking to a culture. He's talking to a specific woman. I was asked by a girl, a single girl, Nida is a single girl, a young maiden, who wants to make herself beautiful. But for what purpose? So that someone will want to marry her. So she's doing it for the purpose of wanting to get married. So this is maybe to your point, Yossi, where the objective is to make her husband want her. In this case, a single girl wanting to get married. And how is she making herself more beautiful? By that which doctors have now come up with, through a certain surgery, which a surgery constitutes a wound on the body. In muteres, is this permissible? Because seemingly there's a prohibition against inflicting wound upon yourself. So to start with, he doesn't even begin with the question of where the doctor, what the doctor isn't allowed to do. That's what Tzitz Eliezer began. What is the theoretical position of doctors in Torah? And are there any limitations to that? And then he says, yes, there's one limitation. The limitation is only healing. And if it's not healing, don't do it. Rabbi Feinstein comes from the other direction and says, well, permission for doctor, not permission for doctor, the question is this act permissible or not? Does this constitute inflicting wound upon yourself? And if it constitutes inflicting wound, don't do it. If it does not constitute inflicting wound, then do it. That's his position. So we have to find out, does plastic surgery constitute a violation of the prohibition to inflict a wound upon oneself?
But the wound's there to make you better, it's not the wound.
So that's what he's going to argue. So he's going to get into that. What kind of benefit outweighs the self-inflicted wound prohibition? And how do you qualify that benefit? So look, and how do you qualify that wound? Let's see. Okay, so before we get there, let's look at the page 1 of the source sheet here. We have to get down just some background information from the Gemara. So what we're reading here is a Mishnah. The Mishnah is in Bava Kama, Tzaddik Amud Beis 90b. We're not reading the whole Mishnah, we're only reading one passage of the Mishnah, which reads, the Mishnah relates, an incident occurred involving one who uncovered the head of a woman in the marketplace. So he publicly humiliated a woman, yanking off her sheitel in public. It's major humiliation. Or yanking off her tichel, whatever it is, right? Her head cover. And the woman came before Rabbi Akiva to request that he render the assailant liable to pay for the humiliation that he suffered. And Rabbi Akiva rendered the assailant liable to give 400 dinars. So the man said to Rabbi Akiva, my teacher, give me time to pay the penalty. And Rabbi Akiva gave him time. The man then waited for her until she was standing by the opening of her courtyard. As soon as she came there, he broke a jug in front of her. And there was the value of about an isar of oil in the jug. The woman exposed her own hair, her own head, and she was wetting her head in the oil and placing her hand on her head to make use of the oil. So she did it herself. And this is why she took off her own head covering. And this is why the man wanted to wait. He wanted to prove that she doesn't care about her head being uncovered. Because look, for a little bit of oil, she did that. It must have been some kind of perfume, some expensive. Oh, 1 second. Let's see. So let's see. The man set up witnesses to observe her actions, and he came before Rabbi Akiva, and he said to him, "Will I give 400 dinars to this woman for having uncovered her hair? By uncovering her head for minimal benefit, she has demonstrated that this does not cause her humiliation. She doesn't care." So Rabbi Akiva said to him, "You did not say anything, i.e., this claim will not exempt you. One who injures himself, although it is not permitted for him to do so, not permitted to harm himself, is nevertheless exempt from any sort of penalty. But others who injured him are liable to pay him. So forbidden, but no penalty. Right? Even to the case of public humiliation, just uncovering a woman's hair. There's no long-term damage per se. Right? But one is not allowed to cause damage to oneself. And you have to pay. So in other words, right? In this case as well, the man was liable to compensate the woman for shaming her, despite the fact that she did the same to herself. Similarly, one who cuts down his own saplings, although it is not permitted for him to do so, because he's destroying property, right? As the violation of prohibition, you shall not destroy, which we learned about in earlier classes, is exempt from any penalty. But others who cut down his saplings are liable to pay him. There's a prohibition against me destroying property. If I destroy my own property, I'm not liable. Who do I pay? Pay myself back. But if somebody else did it to me, that guy has to pay. So, same thing here. A person is not allowed to inflict pain upon themselves, even if they don't have to pay themselves back. Somebody else does have to pay. Okay. So this is the view that one's not allowed to inflict pain upon himself. Now, in really what we should do is go read through the next 2 pages of Gemara. But we're not going to do that. It's a bit much. But what the Gemara does do is the Gemara goes back and forth and says, who is this opinion which says that you're not allowed to inflict pain upon yourself? Because there's an opinion the Gemara quotes that says you're allowed to.
I thought it's halacha. It's not halacha.
It's not halacha. One's not allowed to.
You're not allowed to.
One's not allowed to. But the Gemara brings 2 opinions.
Oh, who says you are allowed to?
The Gemara discusses who is this Mishnah, who is the author of this Mishnah that says it's Rabbi Akiva speaking here. But the Gemara quotes another opinion, another source, also Rabbi Akiva speaking, which says you're allowed to inflict pain upon yourself. So there's obviously some sort of dispute. The Gemara goes through possible reconciliations until finally the Gemara concludes that it's a specific sage that says this. But along the way in the discussion, Tosfos says the following. Page 2, the text there with the 3 dots on either side. Says Tosfos in the Hebrew, the middle of the page 2. There's 3 dots, and then the Hebrew paragraph, and then 3 dots. Tosfos says, Sha'aser lachbol, one is forbidden to inflict a wound upon oneself, afilu l'tzarech, even if there's a need or a gain. On page 2 of the source sheet, sorry. Still in the source sheet, sorry. Still in the source sheet, page 2. There's 3 dots, Hebrew line of 3 dots. This is a quote from Tosfos. Says Tosfos, in the middle of the discussion of the Gemara. While the Gemara is going back and forth trying to find who is the author of this opinion that says one's not allowed to inflict pain upon oneself, Tosfos says the following words. Aser lachbol, it is forbidden for one to inflict a wound upon himself, Afilu l'tzorech, even if there's some gain. Even if there's a gain, one may not do so. Kagoin, for example, Isha shetovcha reisha. This woman who uncovered her hair and put the oil on her head. There was a gain to be had here. The gain being this oil, this perfume. And nonetheless, Rabbi Akiva said she wasn't allowed to do that. She's not liable, but she wasn't allowed to. So even if there's a gain to be had in that self-inflicted wound, still forbidden. Tosfos' view. This is Tosfos' view. Okay.
How did she hurt us? You didn't hurt her.
Sorry?
You didn't hurt yourself?
But Rabbi Akiva considered
Embarrassment.
it was
Hurt.
it's
She just dipped her head in the oil. Wasn't she?
but she uncovered her hair publicly, right?
But
She was asking.
Hurting yourself, you're making a wound.
Okay, so it's but
embarrassment.
that's true. That's true.
Well, it's hurting yourself.
That's true. I don't know if technically speaking, exposing one's hair counts as inflicting a wound. But Rabbi Akiva used that as an analogy, right? That even though a person's not allowed to inflict pain upon himself, he doesn't pay. But if somebody else does, he does pay. So too you. Even though she did it to herself, you still have to pay. So even if that case doesn't constitute inflicting pain, it's a model for what the halacha is by inflicting pain. And therefore Tosfos concludes that even if the pain has some gain afterwards, let's say for some sort of need, still forbidden. This is a very bold statement of Tosfos.
You could do
Which
it,
means-
not a doctor. From there, you see,
Or anybody.
yourself could
No,
do
you
it.
can't do it to yourself.
You could. She could dip her head.
She wasn't allowed to.
She was.
No, Rabbi Akiva said you weren't allowed to, just not liable to pay.
Okay, so
Right? But she wasn't allowed to. Just like a person cannot inflict pain upon himself, even if he's not liable to pay. Right? Pay for the damage. But Tosfos is saying that the prohibition against inflicting wound upon yourself is even if there's some gain to be had. It's a very extreme statement. Yeah? Okay. Let's learn one more piece of the Gemara on the source sheet on page 2 before we go to Rabbi Feinstein. Rather, so after the Gemara goes back and forth trying to find who is the author of this Mishnah which says that it's forbidden to inflict a wound upon yourself, because the Gemara quotes different views. And what exactly is the source for this? What exactly is the biblical source that a person is not allowed to inflict wound upon himself? Rather, says the Gemara, it is this Tana, as it is taught in the Braita. Rabbi Eliezer HaKaper, the distinguished one, said, what is the meaning when the verse states, with regard to the Nazarite? Right, the Nazarite is someone who vows that for extended period of time, a minimum of 30 days, he's not going to drink wine, and not going to become impure, and not going to shave his head or shave his hair. This is a Nazir. It's a person who basically self-elects to behave ascetically.
Aesthetically.
Yeah, for a certain period of time. It's a way of distancing oneself. It seems like the objective of a Nazir is, if the person felt like he was being overindulgent and he wanted to back up a little bit, so he would self-impose a Nazir for a little while. So says Rabbi Eliezer HaKaper, what's the meaning of the verse which reads, with respect to the Nazir, and he shall atone for him for sinning by the soul? And with which soul did this person sin by becoming a Nazirite? What sin did he do? Rather, says Rabbi Eliezer HaKaper, in that he afflicted himself by abstaining from wine, he is considered to have sinned with his own soul, and he must bring a sin offering for the Naziriteship itself for causing his body to suffer. That's why he's got to bring a sin offering, even though there's a value to the life of the Nazir. But at the end of the day, one is not supposed to inflict pain upon themselves, even just holding back from wine. So never mind, you can't inflict pain upon yourself by not hitting yourself, even to refrain from eating to drink a glass of wine. Sinning because you're holding yourself back from, you're inflicting pain upon yourself. So, and therefore the Gemara continues, and are these matters not an a fortiori? And just as this person who afflicted himself by abstaining only from wine is nevertheless called a sinner, one who afflicts himself by abstaining from everything, through fasting or other acts of mortification, all the more so is he described as a sinner. Consequently, Rabbi Eliezer holds that one may not harm himself in any manner, and this is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer HaKaper. So now that we have background, at least some background to the Gemara, to the subject, let's now read Rabbi Feinstein's text. Now,
so the same things with all torturing yourself, the fasting and rolling in the snow, you're not allowed to do
The
that.
Baal Shem Tov was not like, right? The Baal Shem Tov came along and said, don't do that, right? Okay. So said the Rabbi Feinstein, he was asked by a young girl who wants to go through plastic surgery so that she can get married. So 4 lines into his text after the period. V'hinei now. B'Tosfos Baba Kama Daf Tzadik Aleph Amud Beis. In Tosfos, in Baba Kama, page 91b, you have it?
You're in the Hebrew?
Yeah, in the Hebrew there, yeah. 4th line.
From where, the first page?
From on the left column, Siman Vav, 4 lines down. V'hinei.
Yeah,
V'hinei B'Tosfos Baba Kama Daf Tzadik Aleph Amud Beis. In Tosfos, in Baba Kama, page 91b, the Tosfos you just read. Dibra Maschil Ella, the Tosfos that begins with the word Ella. Isa, there Tosfos writes, the Asur Lichbal Ba'atzma is forbidden for one to inflict a wound upon oneself, afilu l'tzorech, even if some need. Kaha, the Isha, just like that woman, shetavcha haresha, who exposed her hair, lahaviyah ke'iser shemen, in order to gain an iser of oil. And that was forbidden, said Tosfos. And therefore and that was the model used by Rabbi Akiva to compare it to someone who inflicts pain upon himself. So inflicting pain upon himself, even if there's some gain, is also forbidden. If so, even though here, beautifying her body so she can get married is not just a need, it's a great need. It's a mitzvah. I don't know if it's a mitzvah, but it's a great need. Seemingly, if we're following Tosfos' hard line, we would say it's forbidden. The doichek it's extraneous, says the Rabbi Feinstein, to differentiate between tzorech katan, between a small need, with tzorech gadol, to a great need, calls man shalom matzin b'ferish. If we haven't seen any distinction clearly, meaning had Tosfos said small gains like the woman who took oil is not allowed, okay, but he just said any need, just like the woman who took the oil. It seems from Tosfos making the blanket statement that any need doesn't count. Great, small, little, we can't make that differentiation unless we would see a source clearly making that differentiation, and because we haven't, we're going to assume it's forbidden if we're to follow Tosfos' hard line. But hayikshal, the following poses a contradiction to Tosfos. Mahad Damasik, from the conclusion of the Gemara, the high Tana, that this Mishnah, which says that it's forbidden to inflict a wound upon oneself, who Rabbi Eliezer a kafir b'Rabbi, is Rabbi Eliezer the kafir, the distinguished one. Shesoiver, who's of the view, which we read. The Nazir who chayta, then a Nazir is a sinner. Shetzir atzman menayayin, because he inflicted pain upon himself by refraining from wine. The Kalma Chaymar, and how much more so, Lamitztar atzman b'chabola, if someone's going to inflict pain upon himself by actually wounding himself. Right? Shavadai, it's clear to me, says Rabbi Feinstein. Mistaber, makes sense. It's clearly logical. Shim yesh lehanas mammon. If this guy just says he's getting paid not to drink wine for a month, or some other pleasure, if he's going to pain himself, and he's not going to drink wine, certainly it's not forbidden. Someone takes a bet. I can go a month sober. Okay, I like to drink a glass of wine every night. I'm not going to do it for a full month. And I says, okay, I'll pay you $500. Is it forbidden for the person to stop drinking wine for the month? No.
He's not harming himself, though.
Sorry?
He's not harming
Exactly. So where are you just getting this idea that when there's a need, it doesn't outweigh the pain? It's going to be painful for me not to drink the wine, but I'm much happier with the cash. Right? So, following. In came, so too, if we're derived from the not drinking wine, which clearly, if you get paid for not drinking the wine, there would be no prohibition. So, gain against pain is permissible. So then certainly with inflicting a wound upon oneself. Even though the Gemara says how much more so. Ein lesser, one should not forbid, if a person is going to go through some sort of pain, and that way gain money. Let's say, you know what's a good example of this? Someone who's a professional boxer. He's going to get hit in the head, but there's gain to be had here. He's making a career, he's making a living, he's becoming famous. Is that forbidden too? I don't know, maybe it is.
You're not supposed to be bad.
Okay, that's not the point.
Well, I know how to say this part. Because you're going to gain money, that's why you want to mess up your money.
Maybe that's a
I don't know.
Okay, so we're going to have to differentiate between different types of pain.
Right.
We're going to have to differentiate between different types of pain. But let's say the pain was equal to not drinking wine. A person has to drink a glass of wine every single night. He's not allowed to stop for a month if someone's going to pay him $500 for it. Come on.
Yes, yeah.
Clearly you could do that, right? So if that's the baseline from which we derive not to inflict pain upon yourself, then we see there's room for this notion of a give and take. Not just all inflicted wound is forbidden, right? There's a give and take to that.
Why does Nazir bring a cover? It's only 30 days, not 50 days, and he's getting bigger for his life. A Nazir should be a sinner then. A Nazir should not bring a cover.
Because at the end of the day,
he's gaining because spiritually.
Yeah. Okay. He's going to get into that a bit. We're going to see soon already. Okay. So for some other need and why he's inflicting of the wound upon himself, seemingly it's permissible. So how is it that Tosfos writes one cannot inflict a wound upon himself even if there's a gain?
But perhaps the woman who removed her wig,
Sorry?
she may have felt that it might be more of a gain for her to get the oil.
That's what you. Good question. Good question. He's going to ask that soon. 1 second. If that's the case, why was it forbidden for her to take the oil? Right? He's going to ask that soon. But what he's trying to get at is that it's not clear that you cannot do anything to your body. There's a question of a give and take here, because we're not going to argue that you're not allowed to take a cash prize and prevent from drinking wine. No one's going to argue that. Right? And if that's the baseline from which we derive this notion that you can inflict pain upon yourself, then obviously there's parameters to that. Right? Which means that Torah does give some bodily autonomy. Just not if there's no use. Not just to destroy it for no purpose. But if the destruction has some sort of gain, then Torah says, okay, take it into your hands and make a consideration. So we have to exactly define the limits of that. What exactly the limits are? What kind of pain is a person allowed to take on vis-a-vis what gain? Right? And this is the framing of the issue for Rabbi Feinstein, which we'll get into next week. I'm going to go through some details as to, for example, refraining from wine is not an active pain, it's a passive pain. So maybe only passive pain you're allowed to go through for gain. Right? We're going to learn. What about medical procedures? Where there's a lot of pain, but there's a gain of medicine. Right? He's going to go through lots of different scenarios like that and come up with some sort of understanding that if inflicting a pain upon himself is risk-free and there's a great gain to be had, good, do it. And therefore she can go through the plastic surgery. That's going to be his conclusion. But this is where we're going, and God willing, much more to come next week. We'll see what the Rambam has to say and the various different Gemaras, different stories. Again, we'll get from the Gemara. But this is the direction. So we have one direction that says, what's a doctor allowed to do? Heal, don't do any inch more. And the other direction says, okay, Torah does not let you do anything you want to your body. But there are certain things Torah does allow you to do to your body, because Torah says you can put yourself through certain issues, through certain pain, if you're going to get some gain. Okay, so let's see. Is there enough gain to be had here in this plastic surgery? If the answer is yes, go for it. That's going to be the direction that Rabbi Feinstein takes.
Did I miss the definition of gain?
So this is going to be the discussion over the next week. We'll get into the details, but at least we frame the issue now. Okay, have a good night, then.